This da, as they say in my part of the world, and welcome from me, Martin Smith, aka Cornish Grandad, to my YouTube channel. Today, we'll stage set our scene with some HDRIs, High Dynamic Range Image. Any wiser? And then add 2 walls to our scene. Rather like a stage set, we don't need to add walls where we don't need them. In the first wall, we create a window and apply the glass shader. Passing light through glass can produce unwanted artifacts, specks of light called fireflies. So optionally, we can improve the scene with an advanced lighting setup. To add movement to our final scene, we'll create a roaring fire next tutorial, but we need somewhere to place it, so we'll add a fireplace and a corroded metal grate where we can import an image texture from a polygon. Today I've started off with a default cube because I want to show you how to use an HDRI to light up your scene, high dynamic range image. So first thing is probably we're going to grab one from a site that I still think of as HDRI Haven, but I've just noticed that they've changed the name, and I've got the link on the screen. This is HDRI Haven, and now notice it changed the name to Polyhaven because they don't just do HDRIs now, they do textures and models as well. So if you browse HDRIs, there are loads and loads of HDRIs, as you can see, and they're on categories over this side. So we're going to find a rural scene, so it's going to be an outdoor scene, and you can choose anything you like. There's loads of them here, but I'm going to choose this one, and once you've loaded it up, it'll be easy to understand what we're doing. So click on that, download it, and save it to your folder. Back in Blender, if we select the shading option, we can get rid of that. We'll create a new one just in case there's anything else in there we don't want. We want to delete the background because we're going to replace that with an environment texture. Texture environment. Connect that up. Nothing's going to happen yet. So if we open our folder and find our HDRI which we just saved. Mine all kept in a folder called HDRI, makes a bit of sense. There we go, and then we can go back to our 3D viewpoint. Nothing's happened, looks exactly the same, and that's because we're still in solid view. If we go to viewport shading, straight away this is our HDRI. If you don't see anything yet, you may have scene world turned on, so you need to turn that off. And now look, you can imagine that this person has stood in the middle of this field and taken this panoramic view, which is absolutely brilliant. So that's going to cast light onto our scene. These lines here are floor, we can get rid of those if I can remember where to put them. Floor, there we go. Looks a bit better. Now, nothing much is happening with our cube, so let's go back to our shader. Let's go back to object mode. This is our shader. We'll make it fully metallic, and we'll take roughness down to something quite low. There we go. Go back to our 3D viewport, and now you can see you're getting the reflections of the scene on your cube. I don't know why, but for some reason if you take roughness down to 0 it doesn't work, it goes black. But if you put it at 0.01 for example, you can see it quite clearly. Now this is in Eevee, so it's this real-time rendering. If we change this to cycles, you'll see quite an improvement. You can clearly see the reflections on the cube. If we move that and let cycles update again, so you can see as you move it around the cube is reflecting what's in the background. So let's revert back to our kitchen scene and we'll load that HDRI image up. So now in our kitchen scene we can import our HDRI. So shading, go to the world view. Add texture, environment texture, connect that up, open our HDRI, check everything's working. There we are. So here's the scene we've been building up so far with the HDRI turned on. Our rural kitchen looks more like a patio, very al fresco at the moment. So clearly we need to add some walls to this. We're going to create a fireplace here. We're going to create a wall with a window to let some of that lovely HDRI light in. I would start with a plane, subdivide that plane, cut a window into it, and then cut a window frame. I'm sure you can do that on your own, you don't need me to do that, and we'll end up with something looking rather like this. The next step is to put a shader on this wall, so I think this is a kind of plaster wall. And this is the shader I ended up with. You can do something different. So I started off with a Musgrave texture, so if I do Control Shift and Enter, I'll show you what that looks like. So you've got this weird pattern. The idea is that you can have two different tones of yellow coming through on here. So if I get rid of that, so that's Control right mouse drag, reconnect. I'll disconnect that for a minute, reconnect that to that. And then I've got a different Musgrave texture, which is a development of the Perlin texture by Ken Musgrave as the displacement. You don't have to do it this way. This is the way I did it. Roughness is reasonably rough, then put some noise and standard noise and bump texture in to give a pattern. And I've also coloured the frame in white. So the next step is to fill in this window, because at the moment it's just a blank space. I want glass in there, so I'll give it some reflection, etc. So we now have our wall with our window frame and a blank space where the window should be. So we can go in now and add the glass to this. So we need to fill in all these faces. So with what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide everything else with a slash key so I can focus on what I'm looking at the moment. So a new technique, we're going to click on there, we'll shift click on there because I'm going to put the window glass in here. If I do F for face, that will join up normally a face, but if I've already got 2 point vertices selected, it'll just do that. If I subdivide that, I've now got a square here, so I can do shift, 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 F for face again, that will fill that in, click, shift, 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 F for face. I can repeat that for here, F for face, subdivide, undo that because I missed the point, went to the wrong point. Now I can select these faces. Whoops, missed one. And I can add a solidify modifier to this because I need a bit of thickness to this glass. How thick's glass? About 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter. That's about right, isn't it? Okay. So I just want to double check that I haven't flipped and I haven't got the face orientation wrong. So everything's blue, which is what it should be. Don't do this, but if I, for example, ended up with something looking like that, that means I've got my face orientation the wrong way around. Red or purple is a warning, so we just go to normals and flip and get everything blue, which is what you want. I now need to make a new material, a glass material. So we call that window glass. Now I could use the principal BSDF. There's no problem using it. I mean, it's the one to use all the time. But we do have these other shaders, most of which have been deprecated. They've been replaced by the principal BSDF. So the glass shader, glossy shader, translucence, transparent. You can all use principal BSDF for those. But I can just for auto, partly because this is actually smaller, but it does the same thing. So that's my principal BSDF. If I select my 3 faces here and my glass and assign, then I go to 3D viewport and go to render mode. I want to turn off face orientation, which I still have on. This is rather annoying. We now have a kind of glass material. Seems to work. It's not great. Let's bring everything else back into the scene. Okay, there's my scene. So we do have glass. We can see through the glass. The glass is given a slight translucent effect. So it seems to be working. Let's look at that in cycles. That'll take a while to update. So that's what it's looking like. It's looking pretty good. And it's a bit hard to tell on this, but we can actually improve this quite a lot. Now, part of the issue is that when light comes through glass, it tends to create lots of what they call artifacts, fireflies, images and stuff, that you don't want to see in the final render. Ideally, what you want to see is everything that the camera can see that hasn't gone through the glass. You want to see it as if the glass wasn't there. And anything that's come through the glass into the camera, you want to know that the glass is there. And there's a little trick that I'm going to show you how to do that. So we're going to mend our glass shader. And we're going to search for a light path node. There we go. So every time a ray comes out of the camera, it's initially got its camera ray. If it then picks up the fact that it's a shadow, for example, or diffuse or glossy, the density of that ray is changed. So what we want to do is anything that's come through from the camera, we want to ignore this glass shader. What we'll do is we'll add a transparent BDSF shader. Likewise, we could use the principal, but these are smaller. So if the camera sees it, we want to see this. So we want to add a mix shader in here. Right, so if the camera sees it, it will pick all of this shader, which is the transparent shader. So it'll just totally ignore the glass. If it's not its camera, then we'll pick this one, which is all the glass BDSF. So it gives the appearance that the glass is actually there. So let's have a look at that in cycles. I think the difference is subtle, but in other situations it can be quite pronounced. So that's a little trick, and I want to thank Andrew from Blender Guru for the initial idea of using this light path ray. Back to site EV, we'll turn back to solid mode. Next step is we need to create a fireplace, and we'll create it over here. So we use the same technique. We'll create a plane, we'll create a wall, but we'll extrude in and out to create a fireplace, and yours will look something like this. Doesn't matter quite how yours looks, this is how I've done mine. So you can see I've extruded out the back to give me some depth. I've created this hood shape, I've created a plinth, and now we can colour this. We're going to use the same plaster wall texture over here, but then use different textures around the fireplace. Exactly how you want to do yours is up to you. I have used a fire surround, which is kind of a grey colour, with a Voronoi texture here to give me this kind of weird effect. And then I've used a grey there, and I've actually put a darker colour in the background as if it's covered by soot. We've got a fireplace, we need to create a grate for this. So let's do that next. So as I've already mentioned, next session we're going to create a roaring fire that's going to sit in our fireplace. I think we probably need a grate to contain it, and we can use a material to populate and colour that texture. So let's hide everything but our fireplace. We use the fireplace as a reference. I'm going to create this from a cube. Now I'm sure there's lots of different ways of doing it, but I'm going to create it from a cube. There we go. And I want this cube to be about 0.5 meters. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I'm going to increase it, double its size on the y-axis. So size y2, and that's going to be great. So let's go into edit mode, and we're going to loop, cut and slide to create the horizontal bands, and I'm going to get 9 of those, and you'll see why in a minute. There we go. Okay, so top view, let's focus in a bit more. So I'm going to create the legs for the corners. I'm going to use a loop, cut and slide again, and I'm going to slide it to it's about there. I'll do it by eye. Do another loop, cut and slide, and I'm going to make sure it's about the same as the one above. Doesn't have to be perfect. And the same for the other side, the sides. So make those corners roughly square. Right. Now I don't need the top filled. In fact, I definitely don't need the top filled. It's just a cube at the moment. So I can delete those edges. Which is giving me this box here. And the actual fire is going to sit on the hearth, so I don't need those ones either. So now I've got just a hollow frame. So in face mode, I can delete every other one. That will give me the bars that I need for my grate. And the same. Now I could have done this by mirroring, but it's such a quick and easy job, it's hardly worth it. See how quickly I'm framing up this object. We have a very simplistic grate. I think I'll get rid of that, that, Very simplistic grate. So let's give it a bit of solidarity. So let's go and add a solidifier to it. 5mm, something like that. There we go. Now, looks okay. We can probably pick it up and put it in the fireplace in a minute. If it's a bit too big, which it might be, we can obviously scale it down, it won't be a problem. So let's shade this. We're going to have a new material and we're going to call it grate. Why not? But while we're at it, where is... There's my cube. Rename that grate. So I know what it is. Now what I'm going to propose to do is go and get a material from one of the websites. There are a few of them around. I'm going to use one from Polygon. So let's go and have a look at the Polygon website. So here's the Polygon website. They've got textures. Lots and lots of different textures here. Obviously we want a metal one, so let's try that. And you've got lots of different ones here. Scroll through. Might be easier just to search for something that is like corroded. Corroded. Oh, there we are. There's a corroded metal one here, which is free, even better. You can choose different resolutions. Clearly not on this free one. But if you want to download it, just go get started and download it. Find a folder to put it in. And you'll end up with something looking vaguely like this. Here are the 4 textures that we downloaded for the corroded metal for Polygon. First one is the colour, so you can see it's quite dark textured material. The second one is going to go into the metallic slot, so it gives it a bit of a texture. The blue one is the normal, so it is subtly coloured. It's very hard to spot from this image, and that will give the kind of bump. And then the roughness is the final grey and white one. So we can now load these into our Blender file. Now we're in a position to take that material we downloaded from Polygon and plug it into our BSDF. There are 2 ways of doing this. I'll show you the slow way because it's easier to understand what's happening first, and then I'll show you the quick way. So we can add a texture, and it's going to be an image texture. Open the file, go to your folder where everything's kept. I keep all my materials in one called materials, and I keep them all in separate folders. I just find it easier. And we're doing there's our 4 color maps you saw earlier. Take the color one and then plug that in. There we go, there's your basic metal color. So we can do exactly the same with the next one, which I think was the metallic. So add texture, image texture, drop that in, open the file and plug that into metallic. Now this should be, it's a black and white image, so it shouldn't be RGB, it should be non-color. Okay, let's move that over there a little bit for a minute. And then we can do exactly the same with the rough displacement, I think. And then finally we do exactly the same with, oh, that should be non-color as well. And then we do the same with the, and plug that in. Now remember, obviously we need to go through the bump map. So drop a bump map in there. And hey presto, that's your finished item. It's looking pretty good. So you've got lots of different textures and things across it. So that's the slow way of doing it. As you can see, we slowly build them up. That's the slow way of doing it. Let's delete all of those and we'll get rid of that. And then we connect that to that. So we're back to where we started. We do N to bring up our setup here. You've got all your various tools down here. One of them is Node Wrangler, and one's Add Principled Setup. So make sure we've got the setup principled BSDF selected. Add Principled Setup. Go to our folder as we did before. So go to your folder as before. So Blender, Materials, Metal Corroded. Select all of them. Easiest to hit A, and then down here it says Principled Texture Setup. Done a full load up. It's wrapped all these up in what they call a frame. It's connected the texture coordinates, and it's done the button map for me, and I've got a finished product. So that's the easy way of doing it. So let's go back to our 3D viewport. We'll bring everything else back, and I'm sure you can move this. Grab that Z mode, Z, bring it up, stick it in your Fireplace. What I want you to do is create some logs, put the logs inside the grate, and put some logs either side, perhaps ready to light our fire later on. Okay, and I will see you ready to create some fire.